My name is Hunter Myers, and I was 30 years old the day I got married and unmarried in the same evening. At 6:04, my mom was standing against a wall in a ballroom that held 184 chairs, and not one of them was hers. She held her purse with both hands. She wore a navy dress she had asked me about 3 times. My dad stood beside her the way he used to stand at a bus stop in February. Patient, like patience was a job you could be good at. Nobody brought them a chair, not the servers, not the groom, not me. She stood there for 40 minutes. I want to be honest with you before we start because none of this works if I'm not. I saw all of it, and for most of those 40 minutes, I did what I always do, which is stay calm and manage the room. What I did at 7:38 cost me more than the wedding did, more than the money, more than the marriage, and I would do it again tomorrow. Welcome back to Red Wine Revenge Stories. This is where we sit with the quiet moments that change a family forever, the ones nobody brings up at the next holiday. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. I should tell you what I do because it explains everything I got wrong. I'm a nurse. For 6 years, I worked med-surg nights at a hospital in Columbus, and for the last two, I've done private duty hospice, which means I sit in people's houses while they die. It is not a sad job. It is a loud job, and my work is to make it quiet. Families fall apart in those rooms. A son shows up after 11 years and wants to argue about a truck. A daughter asks me at 3:00 in the morning whether it's normal to feel relieved. I make the coffee. I say the true sentence nobody else will say in the plainest words I have, and then I let the room hold it. That's the skill, that's the whole skill. I can walk into a house where 4 people are screaming and have them sitting down within 10 minutes. Not because I'm clever, but because I don't flinch and I don't fill the silence. I got paid well to keep the worst rooms in the world calm, and I was good at it. I was so good at it that I brought it home. I used it on my boyfriend's mother the first time she said something with a hook in it, and it worked, and she smiled, and the evening went smoothly, and I drove home that night feeling competent. That's the part I'd change if I could change one thing. Not the wedding, that, because at work calm is for the person in the bed. At home, I never once checked who the calm was actually for. 4 years ago, a woman named Nell Ridgway came onto my floor with congestive heart failure and an opinion about everything. She was 84 then. She watched me chart her intake and output for 2 nights before she spoke to me directly. And when she did, she said, "You're the measuring girl." It stuck. She called me that until the last time I saw her. Snorts, her grandson, came every Tuesday at 7:00 and sat in the vinyl chair and did work email while she pretended to sleep. That was Adam. He was tall and easy, and he laughed at my jokes about the ice machine. And when Nell went home, he asked for my number in the parking garage, and I said yes. And I don't regret that part either. 2 years later, Nell's heart got worse, and the family brought in private duty, and Nell asked for said no first. I called my agency and told them exactly what the conflict was, and they wrote it up, and the family signed the acknowledgement, and I set my own rules on top of that. I never took a gift from her. I never discussed money in that house. I never let her tell me anything she wouldn't say in front of her son. And still, 3 days a week for 2 years, I sat with that woman in the back suite of a house in Bexley and got closer to her than I ever got to the man I was going to marry. Nell was the only person in that family who ever asked what my parents did for a living. She was also the only one who didn't do something with her face when she heard the answer. The Ridgway house sits on a corner lot in Bexley, with a lamp in every front window, and the first time I went there for dinner, I understood that I was being interviewed by a woman who would never let me know I was being interviewed. Corrine Ridgway is 61 and looks like she was pressed from the inside. She has a low, warm voice. She remembers names including the name of the girl who cuts her hair and the name of that girl's son. She poured my water before I asked. She asked me 2 real questions about nursing and listened to both answers. I liked her. I want you to understand that because if she had been cold, it would have been easy. And nothing about the next 4 years was easy. Then she took my coat. Everyone's coats went in the front hall closet, which was 6 ft from where we stood. She carried mine down the hallway and hung it in the laundry room. She did it without a word and without a pause, the way you put a mug in the cabinet where mugs go. I saw it. I want to be clear that I saw it right then, the very first night. Because later people asked me how I could have missed the signs, and the answer is that I never missed a single one. I counted them. I just decided that counting was enough. My coat was a wool pea coat I'd bought at an outlet on sale, and it was clean and it was fine, and it hung in that laundry room next to a broom for 4 years. I told myself it was a small thing. That was the trouble with all of it. My dad drove a school bus in Morrow County for 31 years. Route 4, out past the grain elevator, 52 kids at the peak and 19 by the end when the district consolidated. He retired 2 years before my wedding, and he still can't go into the hardware store in Cardington without somebody in their 40s saying, Mr. Myers, and my dad saying their name back, first and last, and the name of their brother, and what seat they sat in. My mom ran the cafeteria at Cardington Elementary for 26 years. She fed maybe 4,000 children. She kept a drawer in the office with lunch money in it, her own money, for the kids whose accounts went negative, and she never wrote down whose it was because she said a kid can smell a list. Neither of them has ever been on an airplane. My dad owns one suit. He bought it in 2009 for his mother's funeral, and it fits him the same today because he weighs what he weighed. He arrives 40 minutes early to everything, every time, including things that don't start on time and never have. That is how he says he loves you. He shows up before you need him and he waits. They spent their whole working lives feeding other people's children and driving other people's children safely home in the snow. And I grew up believing that this made them the kind of people who would be welcome anywhere. I believed that the way you believe the floor is there. I have never in my life been more wrong about anything. The wedding was going to cost $61,000. I found that number out in a kitchen in Bexley while Corinne showed me a binder, and I remember laughing, and then realizing that nobody else was laughing. Corinne offered to cover all of it. She said it kindly. She said it the way you'd offer to carry something heavy for someone smaller than you, and that's exactly what made my father say no. He drove down to Westerville on a Sunday to say it to my face in my apartment with his hands on his knees. He said, I'm not attending my daughter's wedding as a guest. Then he and my mother wrote a check for $19,400. I know the number to the dollar because I know where it came from. They opened a credit union account when I was 19 and put money in it every month for 11 years. And on the little paper label on the front of the passbook, my mother had written one letter, H. That was it, just H. I tried to give it back. I tried twice, and the second time my mother put her hand flat on the table, which she has done maybe 4 times in my life, and said, Hunter, let us. So, I let them. The Ridgeways covered 41,600. My parents covered the rest, which came to just about a third of the food in the room. I want you to hold on to that because 184 people were about to eat dinner off my mother's savings account while she stood up. The seating chart lived on the dining room table in Bexley for 5 weeks, printed on paper the size of a card table, 18 circles with numbers in them. I had written my parents into table 1 in pencil in my own handwriting back in March. On a Sunday in June, I came in and the chart had been reprinted. Cleaner, nicer paper. My parents were at table 4. Corinne was standing over it with reading glasses pushed up in her hair, and she said she'd made a few adjustments for flow. She said table 4 was closer to people they'd find easier to talk to. She said it warmly, and she named the people, and 2 of them were genuinely lovely, and this is how it works. It never arrives as an insult. It arrives as logistics. I asked her, straight, why my parents were not at the head table with the rest of the immediate family. She took her glasses out of her hair and folded them, which is what she does before she says the true thing. And she said, It isn't about worth, sweetheart, it's about comfort. I looked at Adam. Adam looked at the chart. He had a highlighter in his hand, and he uncapped it and capped it again. I said in my flattest, most professional voice that table 1 seats 10 and we were using 8. Corrine said we'd figure it out. Nobody said no to me. That's what I want you to notice. In 4 years, not one person in that house ever told me no. They just kept moving my coat. We drove home to Westerville that night on the highway with the windows down, and I brought it up before we hit the interchange, because that's the other thing my job taught me. You raise the hard thing early, and you raise it calmly, while everybody still has somewhere else to look. So, I put it on the table between the on-ramp and the county line. I said, table one has 10 seats. We need two of them. Adam said, this isn't the time. I said the car was exactly the time, since we had 20 minutes and nothing else to do. He said, I'll talk to my mom. I let it sit. He turned on the radio, some classic rock station, and he sang two lines of it under his breath, and that was the end of the conversation. Here's what I didn't let myself look at until much later. When Corrine folded her glasses and said that thing about comfort, Adam had nodded. Not at me, at her. It was small, maybe an inch, the kind of nod you give a waiter who asks if everything's all right. I saw it happen. I was standing 4 feet away with my hand on a chair back, and I watched my fiancé agree with his mother about where my mother would sit. And then, I decided I hadn't seen it, not consciously. I don't think anybody makes that decision consciously. You just take the piece of information, and you set it somewhere behind you, and you keep your face doing what it was already doing. So, I did what I do. I started managing it, 14 months of managing it, and I never once considered that the managing was the problem. Tuesdays, Thursdays, Sundays. I'd let myself in the side gate at 7:00 and go around to the back suite, which had its own door and its own little brick patio with two chairs on it that nobody but Mel and I ever used. She was on 2L of oxygen by then. We played checkers and she cheated. Openly. And when I called her on it, she'd say the rules had changed since I learned them. She wanted the window cracked even in January. She wanted the television off. She wanted to know what was happening in the world outside that suite. And since the world outside that suite was mostly my wedding, she asked about the wedding. I'd say it was going fine. I'd say the flowers were handled and the band was booked. I would give her the version I gave everyone in the same steady voice. I used to tell a family that their father is comfortable. And one Thursday in July, she let me finish the whole report. And then she took the checker out of my hand and set it down and said, you lie worse than you think you do, measuring girl. I laughed. She didn't. She looked at the window for a while, and I noticed she was working up to something. The way patients do when they've decided to spend energy on you. She didn't say it that day. She waited 3 more weeks. And when she finally said it, it went through me like a needle finding the vein on the first try. Corinne offered to help with the ceremony programs, and I said, yes, because she had a designer and I had a night shift. I sent her my copy for the family page. I had written, Dale Myers drove a school bus in Morrow County for 31 years. Ruth Myers managed the cafeteria at Cardington Elementary School for 26 years. I was proud of those 2 lines. I read them out loud in my car before I sent them. The proofs came back a week later, 300 of them, already printed on heavy cream stock with a deckled edge, and my parents' page said, Mr. and Mrs. Dale Myers, Cardington, Ohio. That was all of it. Corrine explained that listing occupations in a program had gotten a little dated, and that she'd kept everything consistent. I turned the page. Adam's father was listed as a regional director of a title insurance company. His uncle was listed as a partner at an accounting firm. Corrine was listed as the chair of 2 boards and a hospital auxiliary. Consistent. I stood in my kitchen in Westerville with a box of 300 programs on the counter, and I felt something go very quiet and very level inside me, which is what happens to me instead of anger. I did not call her, I did not throw them out. I counted, for the second time, my coat in the laundry room, my parents' names with their lives sanded off. 2. I remember thinking, with total calm, that I would fix this after the wedding, from the inside, once I was family. My mother drove 45 minutes down from Cardington for my dress fitting and brought a coffee cake in a Tupperware, because you don't show up at a place empty-handed. And she has never once understood that this rule does not apply to bridal salons. The girl at the counter took the Tupperware with both hands, like it was a live animal. My mom sat on the little velvet bench with her purse on her knees while I stood on the platform, and the consultant making conversation asked her if she was my aunt. My mother said something like that. She said it lightly. She said it with a smile, and she looked at me in the mirror and gave me a tiny shake of the head that meant, don't, and I didn't. I stood up there in $1,100 of somebody else's idea of white, and I let a stranger think my mother was my aunt, because correcting her would have made the room awkward. And I am a professional at not making rooms awkward. Afterward, we went to a department store at the outlet mall, and my mom bought her own dress, navy, $78 on the clearance rack, and she asked me 3 separate times whether it was formal enough. Once in the store, once in the parking lot, once on the phone that night at 9:40. I told her she looked beautiful, she did. She wore that dress one time in her life, and I have not been able to look at anything navy blue the same way since. It was the second Sunday in August, hot, the window cracked anyway. Nell had her checkers lined up and she wasn't playing. She asked me where I'd be sitting at my own wedding. I said table 1, obviously next to Adam. She asked where my mother and father would be sitting. I opened my mouth and nothing came out of it, which is unusual for me, and she watched that happen with her chin down. Then she looked out the window at the hedge her son pays a company to shape twice a year, and she said, "Watch where people put people. That's everything a family believes." I didn't say anything. "You don't when a patient hands you something like that." She wasn't finished. She said, "I used to do the seating myself. 38 years I've known exactly what I did." Her hand was flat on the blanket, and it wasn't shaking. I asked her what she meant. She said, "Ask Karen about table 19 sometime. Don't ask her tonight." And then she picked up a checker and jumped 3 of mine in a move that was definitely not legal, and told me the rules had changed, and that was the end of it. I drove back to Westerville with the radio off. Table 19? I didn't ask. I want you to sit with that because I had 11 weeks in which I could have asked, and I spent all 11 of them being tactful. In September, I did the thing I'm actually trained to do. I called a meeting, 3 people, 1 table, 1 agenda item. The way you run a family conference when somebody's decisions are being made by people who aren't the patient. I said it plainly. I said, table 1 seats 10. The wedding party plus Adam and me comes to 8. There are 2 open seats, and I want my mother and father in them. And I want that settled tonight so nobody has to think about it again. I did not raise my voice. I did not bring up the coat or the programs, because you don't litigate history in a room where you need a decision. Corrine looked at me for a moment and said, "Of course, sweetheart." Just like that, she reached over and touched my wrist. Adam sat back in his chair and spread his hands and said, "See, done. That's it, that's handled." I felt the relief come up through me like warm water and I let it. And then some small cold part of my brain, the part that has watched 100 families agree to things in a hospital hallway, said out loud, "Can you send me that in an email so I can forward it to the venue?" Corrine said, "Naturally." She said it while standing up. The email never came. I checked on a Wednesday and again the following Tuesday. And then I told myself she was 70% through a guest list and I'd follow up in person. If you've ever gotten a yes from someone and known right then that you should have gotten it in writing, you already know how this ends. Tell me in the comments what your yes was. I read them. And subscribe because the strangest thing I did in this whole story, I did 3 weeks later, alone in an empty ballroom. The Marlowe House is an 1890s estate outside Granville that somebody restored and now rents out on Saturdays. I drove out on a Tuesday afternoon in September to confirm the floor plan by myself because Adam had a client thing and because I wanted to stand in the room. The coordinator's name was Denise. She was kind and tired and she had a clipboard. And when I asked to see the final seating layout, she turned her screen and said the current version was approved by the primary contact. I asked who the primary contact was. She said, "Mrs. Ridgway." Not the bride. The contract had been signed in Corinne's name in March, along with the deposit, and 80% of the balance had gone in 90 days out and was non-refundable, and none of that was a scheme. It was just how the paperwork happened to fall, which is how most of the worst things in my life have happened. Denise offered to note my preference. I said please. Then I asked if I could walk the ballroom and she said, "Sure, take your time." It was empty. Bare oak floor, 18 bare round tables stacked along the wall, the head table platform 3 steps up at the north end. And in the northeast corner, a pair of swinging kitchen doors with round windows in them. I stood in that corner, I don't know why, and then I did what I do, which is measure things. I started the timer on my phone and walked from that corner to the head table at a normal pace. 41 seconds. I stood there looking at the number for a while, and then I cleared it and drove home. A few weeks later, I understood why I'd needed it. I went up to Cardington for dinner the last Sunday in September. Pot roast because there is always pot roast, and the good plates, which come out now when I visit and never used to. I came in through the side door and my mother didn't hear me. She was at the sink with the water off holding a dish towel and she was talking to the window. She said, "We're so proud of her." Then she said it again a little quieter. Then a third time shorter, "We're proud of her." She was taking words out of it. She was trying to find the version that would sound the least like it was practiced, and she was practicing it. And I stood in my parents' doorway with a bag of dinner rolls in my hand, and I could not make myself walk into that kitchen. My father was out on the porch with the light on, shining his one pair of dress shoes with a rag and a tin of polish that has been in that house since I was in high school. He'd already shined them the week before. He did them again because it gave him something to do about the thing he was nervous about. That's my parents. My mother was memorizing a line for a room that had never planned to give her one, and my father was polishing shoes nobody was going to look at, and both of them were doing it out of love. And I went back out to the car and sat there for a minute before I came in again through the front door like a normal person, loudly, so they'd have time. 2 Sundays before the wedding, I came out of Nell's suite after my shift, and Corinne was in the kitchen with 2 cups of tea already poured, which meant it wasn't a coincidence. She asked about Nell's numbers. I gave her the honest version. Weeks, not months. And comfort was the whole plan now. She nodded and held her cup with both hands. Then she said the warmest thing anybody in that house ever said to me. She said, "You've been a gift to her. She lights up on Tuesdays. She counts the days, you know." I said, "Thank you." I meant it. And then, in the exact same voice, with the exact same warmth, she said, "I hold her healthcare power of attorney. All I want is for the last stretch to be peaceful for her. Disruption isn't good for her heart." She said it the way you'd mention the weather on the drive up. She stirred her tea. She asked whether I wanted a lemon. There was no threat anywhere in it. There was no sentence I could have repeated to another person that would have sounded like anything at all. And I sat there with my cup and understood with complete clarity that I had just been shown a price list. If I ever made noise, I would lose that room, that woman, and the last week of her life. And it would all be perfectly legal and perfectly polite, and nobody would ever be able to prove it was anything else. I said the tea was good. That's what I said. I have thought about that sentence more than almost anything else I've ever said out loud. 10 days out, I finally told my mother, not all of it. I gave her the seating chart and the programs, carefully, the way you give a family bad news in pieces so they can put their hands on the table first. I did it on the phone because I'm a coward about her face. I told her that there had been some back and forth about the tables, and that I was handling it, and that she and Dad were going to be at table one where they belonged. I wanted her to be angry. That's what I was doing, if I'm honest. I was standing at my window in Westerville, hoping my mother would get mad so that I would be allowed to. She was quiet for a while and then she said, "Don't lose a husband over a chair." I started to answer and she kept going. And this is the part I still can't get all the way out of my chest. She said, "I don't need to be up front, honey. I've sat in the back my whole life, it's fine back there. You can see everybody." She said it without a single ounce of self-pity, like she was telling me where the good parking was. My mother, who fed 4,000 children, telling her daughter that she was comfortable being seated where people put people like her. That was the night I understood this thing did not start in Bexley. Bexley just had better paper. And the last person in my life who might have stood up with me had just very gently sat down. The rehearsal dinner was Friday night at a restaurant in Granville. One long table for 31 people. My parents were seated at the far end by the hallway to the restrooms, not a table off to the side, just the end past everybody, where the servers had to squeeze by. Corinne stood and welcomed everyone, and thanked her sister for flying in from Charleston, and thanked Adam's college roommate for driving down, and thanked the caterer by name. She did not introduce my mother and father. She didn't skip them out of malice. She got to the end of her list and sat down, and the list simply hadn't had them on it, so I stood up. I said, "Before we eat, I want everybody to meet Dale and Ruth Myers." And I told that table about Route 4 and the grain elevator, and about a drawer with lunch money in it. And my father went red to his ears, and my mother put her napkin against her mouth. People clapped. Corinne clapped warmly, longer than anybody. And then she said, "Isn't that lovely?" And asked her sister about her flight. Out in the gravel lot afterward, I told Adam that I needed him to fix the table thing before tomorrow. Tonight. By text if he had to. He put both hands on my arms. He said, "It's one more night, can you just get through it?" That was the second nod, and it came with a request attached. And here's where I was by then. 184 invitations had gone out. $61,000 was spent and non-refundable, and my parents' savings account was inside that number. I said, okay. I could get through it. That was always the problem. I could always get through it. That night I sat in my car in the hotel lot until 11:00 with the engine off and my phone in my hand. I had Denise's number pulled up, not the wedding planners, not Adam's, the coordinators, because she was the only person in the whole apparatus who had ever told me a plain true fact. I thought about what would happen if I called. The venue money was gone either way, the band was gone. The flowers were sitting in a cooler in Newark, already cut. Calling would not save $1 of my parents' 19,400. It would only mean they'd lost it for nothing, and that my mother would spend the rest of her life cert it was because of her. Then I thought about Nell. Nell had told me she was coming. She had a jacket made for it, teal with covered buttons, and she had shown it to me on a hanger with the plastic still on. She was 88. And it was going to be the last thing she got dressed up for, and everybody in that house knew it. I put the phone in the cup holder. I made myself a deal, out loud. Alone in a parking lot in Granville, I said, tomorrow I smile, and Sunday I sort this out properly. In private, with Adam, like adults. Private, that was the word I used. I've heard myself say it about 100 times since. Private is where they had been beating me for 4 years, and I walked in there one more time and shut the door behind me. Saturday morning. The bridal suite upstairs at the Marlowe house. 4 women and a curling iron and a plate of fruit nobody touched. Adam's sister Piper is 24 and she was doing my veil, standing behind me. Both of us looking at the mirror instead of each other. Which is why she said it. She was fussing with the comb and she said, Adam was so worried you were going to be upset about the table stuff. He told Mom back in September you'd be fine with it. Then she stopped. Her hands stopped too. I watched her face in the mirror do the whole thing. The realizing and the deciding whether to fix it and the choosing not to, all in about 3 seconds. She said, this comb's crooked, and she took it out and put it back in the same place. I said, it's fine. It looks good. I want to be exact about what that sentence did to me, because it wasn't a shock, it was a subtraction. Up until that morning, I had been married in my head to a weak man, and weak is survivable. Weak, you can work with. Weak means he wants the right thing and can't reach it. But he hadn't been overruled in September. He had been consulted. He had predicted his wife's reaction to her own parents being moved, and he had reassured his mother about it in advance, so that nobody would have an uncomfortable evening. He wasn't caught between us. He had picked months ago in a room I wasn't in. I thanked Piper for the veil. The ceremony was at 4:00 in the garden, and I'm not going to be sarcastic about it because it was beautiful. The light was doing that low gold thing it does in October in Ohio. There were maples going orange behind the arch. My father walked me down and his arm was shaking, and he did not cry until he sat down. And then he cried the way men his age cry, which is one hand over the face like he's checking for a fever. My mother held a tissue in both hands and never used it. Adam said his vows and meant them. I believe that. I have never once thought he didn't mean them. At 4:31 we went into the library off the front hall with the officiant and 2 witnesses, and I signed the marriage license on a walnut table with a pen somebody handed me. And the ink bled a little at the M in Myers because the paper was old stock and thick. I remember thinking that was funny. I remember thinking, there, it's done. And now I can fix everything from the inside because now I'm family, and family gets to say things. That was the last act of the woman who believed she could manage any room. She signed her name at 4:31 in the afternoon, and she had about 90 minutes left. Cocktail hour ran from 5:00 to 6:00 on the lawn, and I was not in the building for 1 minute of it. Our photographer, Ray, had a list of 40 setups and a hard stop at 6:00 because of the light, and she moved me around that garden like furniture. And I let her because it was the one part of the day that had a schedule I understood. Nell was under the big maple in her chair with her tank on the back, wearing the teal jacket with the covered buttons, and somebody had put a blanket over her knees that she kept pushing off. I crouched down next to her, and she took my chin in her hand, which she had never done in 2 years, and she looked at me hard and said, "You look beautiful." "Don't let them ruin it," I said. Nobody was ruining anything. She let go of my chin and said, Then my dad danced with me on the grass before the band had even started playing. No music at all, just him counting under his breath because he learned to dance in 1981 and never updated it. My mother took a picture of it on a phone she can barely operate, and it came out blurry, and it is framed in my hallway. That was the hour 5:00 to 6:00 on the lawn out of the building. I want you to hold on to it because it's the last good one I got. If you're watching this and your mother is in the next room, go say something to her now and then come back. Subscribe so you don't lose the rest of this. The doors opened at 6:00 and I wasn't in the room. The ballroom doors opened at 6:00 and I walked in on my husband's arm to applause, and I did what any bride does, which is scan for the people who belong to me. Table 1 was up on the platform, 3 steps, 10 chairs, 10 place cards standing in little brass holders. I read them from left to right while I was still smiling. Adam, me, Corrine, Gerald, Piper. Adam's aunt from Charleston, her husband, Adam's roommate, the maid of honor, the best man. 10. No Dale, no Ruth. I kept smiling because there were 184 people watching me arrive and my face is trained. I found my parents' names on a card by the door. Table 14. I looked for table 14. It was in the northeast corner against the wall, under the swinging kitchen doors with the round windows, and I knew the exact distance from that corner to where I was standing because I had timed it. Myself on a Tuesday in September with an empty room and no idea what I was doing. Denise was near the door with her clipboard held against her chest, and she didn't look up when she said it, quiet, out of the side of her mouth like a nurse handing off a chart. She said, "Mrs. Ridgway updated the layout at 5:15. Then she said, "I'm sorry. Table 14 had 8 chairs at it. My parents' side of the family, the ones who came, made 9 people. My mother is the one who stood." Of course she was. 9 people, 8 chairs, and my mother in her $78 navy dress said she was fine. She'd been sitting all day and she stepped back against the wall next to the kitchen doors. 6:04. I know because I looked at my phone under the table. Every time a server came through, those doors banged and swung back past her shoulder, and she flinched the first 4 or 5 times and then stopped flinching. A young man with a water pitcher asked her twice if he could get her anything, and she said, "No, thank you, honey. I'm all set." My father stood next to her with his hands folded in front of him like he was at a graveside, and I could not get up. The toast order had started. The welcome, the blessing, Gerald's 2 minutes about how happy he was, and I was at the head table on a platform 3 steps up in a white dress in front of a room. And every instinct I had said that standing up right then would make a scene in the middle of my own wedding. So I sat. That's when Corinne slid into the chair beside me, put her hand over mine, and told me, without any cruelty at all, about her own wedding 38 years ago. And about a table at the very back of a room in a country club in Columbus, and what number that table was. Table 19. She said the number like it was a scar she was showing me on purpose. She said her mother-in-law made the chart that year, and that everyone had been perfectly nice to her, and that she went home and cried in a rented car, and then never cried about it again. She said she came from a trailer on a county road not 40 minutes from where my parents live now. She said all of it holding my hand, and then she said, "Nobody gave me that chair, sweetheart. I took it, you can too, you just can't bring them with you." I understood 2 things at once. She was telling me the truth about her life, and she was telling me that what was happening to my mother there was the toll, and that she had paid it, and that fare was fair. Then she got up to talk to friends, 6:44. She was maybe 10 ft from me with a wine glass, facing 2 women I'd met at the shower, and she said, at completely normal volume, not a whisper, "Because you don't whisper about things you don't think are wrong. Don't look over there, they look cheap." One of the women laughed just a little, the polite kind, and Adam heard it. He was 1 step behind her with a beer in his hand, and he heard every word. And he turned his head and looked at me, and he nodded. Not at his mother, at the situation, the nod of a man who wants a thing to be over. Then he came and put his hand on my back and said, "Don't." Not tonight, he was half right, I shouldn't have, but it was absolutely going to be tonight. I sat at that table for about 10 minutes and did the thing I do before every clinical decision that matters, which is stop and list it out, cost by cost, in order, so that whatever I do next, I do with my eyes open. 1. My parents' $19,400. Every contract was signed, the balance was paid, and nothing was coming back. If I blew this up, that money was gone, and they would know it was gone because of what they were watching. 2. My job. 3 days a week, 2 years, the best assignment I've ever had. Corinne holds the power of attorney, and one phone call to my agency ends it. And she had already told me so over tea, politely, with lemon. 3. Nell. 88 years old, weeks left, on the other side of a door that Corinne holds the legal key to. If I did this, I would never sit in that back suite again. I would not be there at the end. I know exactly what the end looks like. That's my whole profession, and I knew precisely what I was choosing to be absent from. I sat there and I made myself count all three, out loud in my head, no rounding. Then I thought about an old woman telling me to watch where people put people. I thought about my mother telling me it's fine in the back. You can see everybody. I thought about 41 seconds, and I pushed my chair away from the table. I went down the 3 steps and across the dance floor in my wedding dress, and nobody stopped me because nobody could think of a reason a bride shouldn't cross her own dance floor. The band was in the middle of something slow. I walked past table after table of people holding forks. I got to table 14 and I said, "Excuse me," to my cousin, and I picked up 2 empty chairs, one in each hand. They were heavier than they looked. They're banquet chairs with those thick padded seats, and the frames dig into your fingers. I carried them back across that floor. It took a lot longer than 41 seconds. It took long enough that the band actually stopped playing right in the middle of a bar. First the horn, and then the bass, and then everything. And the only sound in that entire room was 2 chair legs knocking together and my dress dragging on oak. 184 people watched a bride carry furniture. I set them down at the head table on the end, and I took the 2 place cards nearest the edge out of their little brass holders and laid them face down on the tablecloth. Then I went back for my parents. I didn't make a speech to them. I said, "Mom, Dad, you're up here." My mother hesitated. She looked at Corrine and then at me, and she started to say she was fine. My father didn't hesitate for 1 second. He walked up those 3 steps ahead of her, and he pulled out his wife's chair first. The way he has pulled out that woman's chair for 41 years, and he waited. It was 7:38. The band leader was standing at the edge of the stage, holding the microphone against his leg, and I put my hand out, and he gave it to me because I was the bride, and that was the only moment all night that the pecking order in that room worked in my favor. I want to tell you exactly how I talked because it matters. I used my work voice, the one I use at 2:00 in the morning to tell 4 adults in a hallway what is going to happen to their father. Level, unhurried, a little bit flat. I never raised it, not once, not at any point in what follows. I said, "Thank you all for coming out here today. Most of you drove a long way." I said, "At 4:31 this afternoon, I signed a piece of paper in the library. On Monday morning, I'm going to start the process of undoing it." Nobody made a sound. I said, "I want everybody to stay and eat, please." My mother and father paid for close to a third of the food on these tables, out of a savings account they started when I was 19. And not one plate is going in the trash tonight. Then, I did the only thing I actually know how to do. I gave the room the chart. I said, "My mother stood against that wall from 6:04 until 6:44, that's 40 minutes. There are 184 people in this room. Not one person stood up and gave her a chair." And then, I said the part I had to say because it was true, and because leaving it out would have made the rest of it a performance. I said, including me, I sat right up here and watched it for 40 minutes. That's mine. I'll be carrying that for a long time. Corinne had turned around by then. I looked at exactly where she was standing, and I kept my voice at the same level it had been the whole time, and I said, "You were right. It isn't about worth, it's about comfort." Yours, Corinne Ridgway raised her voice in public for what I believe was the first time in 38 years. And the worst thing that happened to her that night was that 184 people got to hear what she actually sounds like. It came out high and thin, and it cracked in the middle. She said, "You have destroyed my son." I set the microphone down on the tablecloth so it wouldn't pick anything else up, and I answered her without it, just loud enough for the first two rows. I said no, he did that at 6:44 and the whole room watched him do it. Adam never said anything at all. That's what people who were there still bring up. The ones who talked to me, not the chairs, not the microphone, that his mother screamed and his wife of three, and 2 hours put the mic down, and he sat back down in his chair and looked at the tablecloth. Gerald studied his plate like there was something written on it. Somebody's toddler started crying at table 9 and got carried out. And then, slowly in ones and twos, people started eating because I had told them to eat, and nobody could think of anything else to do. And there is nothing on this earth stranger than a room of 184 people quietly cutting into chicken at a wedding that just ended. Piper got up. She walked around the long way past the bar, and she pushed her grandmother's wheelchair up close to the head table, where my parents were sitting, and she set the brake and she stayed there. At 10:08, I wheeled Nell out to the circle drive to wait for the car, because that was still my job for about another 20 minutes, and because I wanted it. I'd already seen Karen typing at the table with her thumbs, and I have worked for that agency long enough to know what a Saturday night message to a staffing line looks like. So, I knew. I checked the tank, and I checked the cannula behind her ears, the way I'd done maybe 600 times, and I got her into the backseat the way I always did. One arm behind her shoulders, her hand on my forearm on three. She was light. She had been getting lighter for months, and I had been charting it. She held onto my wrist after she was in, and she didn't let go, and she said, "You did right." Then she said, "I didn't, not when it was my turn." She said the number of the table. She said it very clearly, and then she looked out the other window. I buckled her in. I tucked the blanket she didn't want around her knees anyway, because it was 48 degrees out. I said, "I'll see you Tuesday," which was a lie, and she said, which meant she knew it was, and I shut the door. I stood in that circled drive in a wedding dress and watched the tail lights go down the lane and out onto the road, and I counted, because I cannot help it. 41 seconds until I couldn't see them anymore. And I laughed out loud in the dark, alone, at the fact that I was still measuring things. I slept in my old room in Cardington that night. My mother made eggs in the morning, and nobody talked about it. And my father went out and started the car 20 minutes before we needed to leave, out of habit. Here is the accounting. The Marlowe house refunded nothing, which was in the contract in plain language. The band refunded nothing. The florist refunded nothing. My parents' $19,400 was simply gone, all of it. And my mother said the thing I knew she would say, which was that it was only money, and she'd rather have it spent on that than on almost anything. I mailed the ring back certified, because in Ohio, a ring is a conditional gift and it wasn't mine. And I didn't want a single thing from that house to be arguable. Corinne's attorney sent a letter demanding the $41,600 back. It went nowhere. There was no contract between us, and money you spend on a party is a gift, and their lawyer knew that when he mailed it. It wasn't about the money. It was a letter designed to be received. The agency called me Monday morning at 9:00 and pulled me off the Ridgeway assignment apologetically and reassigned me to a house in Grove City. I lost two other private clients in Bexley within 3 months from the same church, and nobody ever gave a reason. The dissolution was finalized 91 days after the wedding in Delaware County in a hearing that took 11 minutes. Adam texted me one time in that whole span. I never answered it, and I've never read it twice. And 19 days after my wedding on a Thursday, I was drinking coffee at my parents' kitchen table on a day off, and I opened the paper to the obituaries, which is a thing I do because of my work. And Nell Ridgway was in it. 88 survived by services private. I was not invited and I did not go. 14 months later, Piper told me at a coffee shop she picked that her grandmother had asked for the measuring girl 3 times in the last week. That was 2 years ago. I want to be straight with you about how much I actually won because I think the honest version is more useful. Corinne Ridgway still chairs the same 3 boards. Nobody in Bexley stopped inviting her anywhere. In Granville, the official version of that night is that a nurse made a scene at the Ridgway wedding, and that is the version that will outlive me, and I've made my peace with losing the story. I paid my parents back. All 19,400 over 22 months working nights and weekend doubles, and my father tried to refuse the first check, and I put my hand flat on the table, which I learned from my mother. They come to my place in Worthington for dinner most Sundays. There's no chart. People sit where they land, and my dad still shows up 40 minutes early and reads in the car until it's time. Piper left that orbit 14 months after the wedding, and she didn't do it because of a lesson. She did it because she had seen, one time with her own eyes, that a person could just walk out of a room. And last Tuesday, I was on a case in Delaware. A woman in her 90s, end stage, and her son was standing down at the foot of the bed with his hands in his pockets. 4 ft away, afraid to get closer the way sons are. I pulled the chair over next to the pillow and I said, "Sit here. She hears better on this side." That's the whole thing, really. I used to think taking care of people meant keeping the room calm. And it took 184 witnesses and the worst night of my life to teach me that sometimes it means making the room very uncomfortable and then standing there and letting it be. That's my story. 41 seconds, 2 chairs, and a table my parents will never have to ask about again. If this reminded you of a room where somebody you love got made small, you don't need a microphone. You just need to move the chair. Do it this week. Send this to the person who's been standing. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.